All right, let's get into the story of how one of the greatest writers in history was really forged by a secret, painful past. For most of his life, Charles Dickens wasn't just a novelist. He was a phenomenon, the literary voice of Victorian England. But behind all that fame, for decades, he hid this deeply painful truth about his childhood, a truth that pretty much shaped every single word he ever wrote. You see, if you really want to understand his legendary novels, all those unforgettable characters and those passionate cries for justice, you have to start with the one wound he never, ever talked about. This personal crisis wasn't just some sad backstory. No, it became the actual engine for his life's work. It's really the origin story of his social conscience. Just try to imagine being the boy, one who'd been, in his own words, delicately and genteelly brought up. And then, just like that, everything is gone. His father, John Dickens, gets arrested and thrown into the infamous Marshalsea debtors' prison. And overnight, the whole family is plunged into poverty and total public shame. So while his family is literally locked away, young Charles is sent to work in this horrible, grim factory right on the banks of the Thames. For 10 hours a day, he's just pasting labels on pots of shoe polish, earning barely enough to survive. This sensitive, bookish kid was suddenly a child laborer. The experience, the child labor, feeling abandoned, the family shame, it was a humiliation so profound he just couldn't bear to speak about it. He hid it his entire life, only revealing the full story in a secret autobiography that was found long after he died. This was his core wound. And you can just draw a straight line from his personal pain to the iconic themes in his novels. His father being in prison, that directly fueled his critique of institutional cruelty in Oliver Twist. His early brush with legal nightmares, that became the basis for his complete takedown of the justice system in Bleak House. His writing became his way of processing his own trauma by giving a voice to everyone else who was suffering. So, Dickens had the motive, the why. Next, he needed the means, the how. How could he turn his experience into a real force for change? Well, he found it in a totally revolutionary new form of media. He absolutely mastered a publishing model called serialization. So instead of giant, expensive books, novels were released in these cheap monthly parts. Honestly, think of it like a 19th century version of a hit streaming show. Dropping one episode at a time and leaving everybody desperate to find out what happens next. His stories became a national conversation. And the power of this new platform was just immediate. His very first serialized novel, The Pickwick Papers, was a total phenomenon. It went from just 500 copies for its first part to over 40,000 for its last. Right then and there, Dickens knew he had the ear of the entire nation. So he has this massive new power, this huge audience. What does he do with it? Well, he doesn't just tell fun stories. He uses his novels to put the whole of Victorian society on trial. His first major target was the cruel, twisted logic of the new Poor Law. Dickens thought this law was profoundly unchristian, and it's easy to see why. It was basically designed to punish people for the crime of being poor, forcing them into these awful institutions called workhouses. With this absolutely biting sarcasm, Dickens just exposed the total hypocrisy of the system. He argued that the workhouse wasn't a safety net at all. It was a trap, one designed by a society that would rather just ignore the suffering of its most vulnerable people. This was his devastating summary of the choice the poor faced. He made his readers see that, for someone with nothing, the workhouse wasn't relief. It was a slow death sentence. Then, in his next novel, Oliver Twist, he condenses this whole huge argument into one single, unforgettable moment. He creates a scene that became a symbol for basic human dignity, a scene that would echo through history. A small, hungry orphan named Oliver asks, "Please, sir, I want some more." But what's interesting is that just a few years later, in A Christmas Carol, his focus kind of shifts. Instead of just blaming broken institutions, he starts to challenge the cold-hearted indifference of individuals. He gives this attitude a face, Ebenezer Scrooge, a man who literally believes the poor should just die and decrease the surplus population. Dickens was now arguing that the system would never change until people's hearts changed first. So here's the big question. Did all these powerful, emotional stories actually lead to any real-world change? And the answer is a resounding yes. The impact was real and tangible. You could see it. His novels helped galvanize public opinion, and that led directly to major reforms. Little Dorrit, inspired by his own father's experience, helped end debtors' prisons. Bleak House pushed for reforms of the corrupt legal system. His fiction wasn't just entertainment, it was a powerful tool for social progress. But here's the thing, just as Dickens was becoming the moral conscience for the entire nation, his own private life was unraveling in this absolute storm of hypocrisy and secrets. At the absolute height of his fame, Dickens publicly and cruelly separates from his wife Catherine, the mother of his 10 children. He even published a letter claiming she was an unfit mother. All of it was to cover up his affair with the very young actress Ellen Ternan. This scandal marked a huge shift, forcing him to confront what he called his own wrongly written past. And you can see this turmoil reflected so clearly in his art. The female characters change big time. Those meek, saintly heroines from his early work, they're replaced by these psychologically complex, willful, and often cold women. Characters like Estella in Great Expectations were a world away from his earlier ideals, almost certainly influenced by his chaotic relationship with Ternan. In his final years, he just threw himself into these exhausting public reading tours. He performed his most dramatic scenes with this manic energy that his friends called reckless and self-destructive. It was almost like the public performance became an outlet for all his private turmoil, but it was an outlet that ultimately consumed him. He died in 1870, leaving his last novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, forever unfinished. Dickens's life really forces us to confront a difficult question, doesn't it? His deep personal wound fueled this passionate, world-changing drive for public justice. And yet, the man who championed family and morality was, in his private life, cruel and deceptive. It really leaves you wondering about the complex and often contradictory relationship between an artist's inner demons and their public legacy.